Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, hey guys, boys and girls, it's Sunday afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. It's live at 5, and welcome to Senior Moments. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that today's episode will be an entertaining thing for you, because it's kind of an interesting story that dates back really to the early 80s. You know, somebody asked me the other day, why are you doing all these Senior Moment things? Well, I do it for two reasons. One, kind of just sharing these stories help me remember a lot of things, and I think working on my memory is not a bad thing. And two, you know, I have grandkids and kids that haven't even heard these stories, so I know many of my friends that I've talked to and conversed with over the years have heard some, but sometimes they haven't heard the details. So, and this one today is actually kind of unusual because it's not a story that I've told many people just due to the context of it, but it goes back, as I said earlier, into the early 80s. I had a friend, a magician friend. You know, many of you may not know it. I'm a a semi-pro. I am a senior, but a semi-pro magician, which basically means I have a real job, you know, with health insurance and 401ks and all that. But anyway, I've done a lot of magic over the years, and this goes back into the early 80s, which I think I've said 3 times now. And it involves a friend of mine who is also a magician. He and I were Sanford alum and students together there. His name was David Garrard, and David lives in Louisville. And he's been a very, very great friend of mine, not only in magic, but also as a brother in Christ. And anyway, we got a wild idea back in the 80s to put together a 2-man show that we called Spellbound. And the reason we did it was because we found out there was a lot of folks, you know, that were interested in magic, but the idea of having 2 magicians on stage, sometimes even doing synchronized routines like this one you see pictured here, where we did the old amazing linking ring, Chinese linking ring effect, but we did it to an interesting piece of music. It was the soundtrack from Deliverance, Dueling Banjos. And so we had a lot of fun doing that. But anyway, not a long story short, but we started doing some gigs in malls around the South, and one here at the old Brookwood Village Mall, which is now closed, and one of the malls in Tupelo, and then Montgomery, Alabama. I think we did one there at the old Normandale Mall, and we even did one at what was called the Mall in Louisville, where David lived. And in this show, each of us did separate routines, but then some of the things we did together. In fact, we had a really neat thing, if we had the right circumstances and lighting, where we did a Laurel and Hardy routine. We called it Laurel, what do we call it? Laurel and Harl and Lardy. Harl and Lardy, that was the name of it. You get to guess who played Lardy. But anyway, we had a strobe light, and it was a little skit that we did. And David lived at the time, again, still does, in Louisville. He was attending seminary up there. And, of course, I was still here in Birmingham. And one day I get a call from a guy claiming to be a promoter for a afternoon magic show to benefit the National Guild for the Blind. And I'd never heard of the National Guild for the Blind, but, you know, the idea of doing a big show kind of had my attention. And what he wanted was a full afternoon show, 90 minutes with an intermission. And he said it was going to be held at the Boutwell Auditorium here in Birmingham. And for those of you who don't know anything about the Boutwell Auditorium, it was kind of predated the Jefferson Birmingham Civic Center that we have here today, but the Boutwell is still there, and it was a giant auditorium that sat about 5,000 people. But one of the things that I remembered the most about the Boutwell was there was a radio station here, WVOK, the Mighty 690, and they would promote these rock and roll shows back in the 60s and well, really more in the 70s, but sometimes in the 60s. And they would literally fill up this auditorium. There was a big stage on one end that you'll see in just a second. But, you know, the poster that you see here, I remember this. I don't remember exactly what date this was, but I remember going to this show as a kid and the reason I remember this particular show, and they had all manner of acts. A lot of the British invasion was starting up about this time, and so all of these acts that were, you know, playing the top 40 tunes back in the day. You can see Billy Joe Royal and Lou Christie and the people, I don't remember them so much. The Trogs, the Ohio Express, the Buckinghams, Herman's Hermits. But I remember this show Paul Revere and the Raiders were playing at, and the reason I remember it is because there was the lead singer of Paul Revere and the Raiders. I think his name was Mark Lindsay, if I'm not mistaken. You may have to correct me on that one in the comments. But he was a really good-looking guy. And I got to tell you, I went in, I had a ticket, I went in, and the girls were screaming so loud that I never heard the music. I'm told they played several songs, but you could not prove it by me because of the way these gals were screaming and hollering for Mark Lindsay. And the auditorium itself was big. I mean, there was probably 2,000 or 3,000 seats that could be placed on the floor, in addition to these mezzanine and kind of balcony areas that people could sit in. So as I said earlier, it would actually seat about 5,000 people. And of course, that was the stage in which we would be performing our act. And so, needless to say, it was exciting that the idea of us doing a seat at Boutwell Auditorium at this afternoon magic show for the National Guild for the Blind. Well, the guy that was promoting the show kind of, you know, he said, you know, if we sell more tickets than we can fit into the auditorium, you'll need to do a second show as well. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. And he said, how much would it cost us to do this show? And so we quoted him a price of $1,200. And I got to tell you, that was, for us at that time, it was a small fortune that we thought we were going to be making at that show. I mean, $1,200, that means $600 a piece. That was a lot of money when you're doing, you know, $25 and $35 birthday parties, and, you know, you're working, doing anything you can to make a little money doing magic. And guess what? He said, great. And so he booked us on the spot. He said, put it on your calendar. And so we started prepping, you know, the set list for that extended show. And what happened was, as we were, you know, counting off the days and watching the calendar, you know, come off and getting closer to that date, about 2 weeks before the show date, I opened the Birmingham Post-Herald, and it wasn't on the front page, but on page 2, page 3, somewhere in that vicinity of our local newspaper. You remember local newspapers, right? These big paper things that got your news that way. Anyway, there was a 4-column article about the so-called National Guild for the Blind and a magic show fundraiser that was going to be held at Boutwell Auditorium. And the reporter had done some research and investigation, and it Turned out the tickets were being sold in what's known as a boiler room operation over the phone. They would call, hundreds and hundreds of people. I guess it was a precursor to the telemarketers we are so familiar with now. And so they would offer to sell these tickets for the charity, and of course people would buy the tickets. And it was kind of a familiar hustle in a way. I mean, you've probably had people calling you about tickets to the circus and the FOP rodeos, and no, come on, FOP, don't sue me over that one, okay? But these legitimate methods of selling tickets, but in this case, there were people that would take advantage of that thing, knowing that, not everybody that bought a ticket is going to come to the show. They may give them away to their family or employees, or they may just not come at all, but they feel like they're making a worthy investment. And it turned out the charity was technically real. It was a 501c corporation, but the article alleged that there was no real national guild for the blind. It was just a front for this ticket sales and money-raising operation under the guise of doing a magic show for charity. And well, this whole boiler room situation, people raise thousands in these cities in Birmingham, and they this was no real exception. These guys were doing well, and that was the reason why they needed to particularly have the ability to do a second show, because they were going to sell all the tickets they could. And if they oversold the actual seating capacity in Boutwell, well, then they would require us to do a second show. And so, but here's this article in the newspaper, and I'm devastated because I don't know what to do. I immediately called David and told him all about it and read in the article. And he said, man, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know. I said, I'll try to call the guy, but I was thankful that the reporter who wrote the article didn't put Tommy Ellison and David Garrard are part of the magic show. We weren't even in the article. It was all about the show itself and the fact that this organization would raise all this money, sell all these tickets, and in reality, they would give, 12, according to the article, 12 or 13 pairs of glasses to some organization that might need them. So we kind of dodged some serious embarrassment by not having our name in the article. But I called the promoter on the phone. I had his number, and I asked him, I said, man, what's going on here? Have you seen this article? And he said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He brushed it off. He claimed the reporter was just trying to cause trouble, and he said the show would still happen, and we would get paid, and everybody would be happy. So he asked again what we would charge for a second show, and I said, well, we're already set up and everything, so I guess we would only charge you $1,000. So on one hand, I'm really nervous about what this is all about, and on the other hand, we have the opportunity to make $2,200 for an afternoon doing magic, which I swallowed hard, and I added, well, by the way, when we get there and start unloading, we'll need to get cash and before the show starts. And he said, no problem. So we figured we would go over there, unload all our stuff, look for him, get paid, and plan on doing the show. And that's exactly what we did when show day arrived on the scene. We set up at the Boutwell Auditorium. We prepared for the show to go on. And we, as we were setting up, we were kind of peeking out through the curtain. And there was about 2,500 folding chairs that had been set up on the main floor, similar to what you saw in the photograph a moment ago. And as we continued to prepare for the show and get all the props set and everything worked out with the stage crews and all, for lighting and curtain purposes and all. We got to a point where we had about 15 minutes prior to curtain time. It was almost showtime. And again, we would peek out through the curtain, and there were about 25 or maybe 30 people that were seated in the front rows. And David and I, we looked at each other in shock. And, it's kind of like, are you kidding me? There's only like a handful of people out here. And of course, if there was 25 or 30 people in a library, it looked like a big crowd. But in the Boutwell Auditorium, 25 or 30 people looked like, the ushers had shown up. So what did we do? Well, we decided the show must go on. And all I can say is we were going to do our best to give the best show we could possibly give for those 25 people that had one heck of a seat on the front row of a magic show at the Boutwell Auditorium. Well, after the show, we packed up, and David thanked the stage crew for making our job easy, and they were great. They were professional. They were courteous. And then the crew foreman said, "Hey, did y'all get paid?" And we told him, said, "Yeah, we got our cash up front before the curtain opened." And he said, "Well, that's smart." He said, "I've been looking for that promoter since intermission, and I think he left at intermission, and we never got paid." And we felt bad about that. We really did. Now, we didn't give him any of our money, not that bad, but we felt bad that he got stiffed on his part of the deal. But as it turned out, the promoter, about halftime of the show, intermission, had vanished, and it was the classic grift. Not only was he, I guess, making money off the Guild for the Blind, but it was an afternoon to remember, and I will tell you that. So we didn't need a second show after all. As we looked out over the crowd, we thought, you know what, we won't be worried about this. So yes, we learned a lot about shady promoters and boiler rooms and, I guess, blind trust. And there we were. We thought we were the Siegfried and Roy of Birmingham, and in reality, we were lucky not to be left holding the bag like the stage crew was. So hence the name of this episode, The Blind Leading the Blind. And we could pack it in. No second show was required, and we learned a very important lesson that day. We did a great show, and we were tickled to death to make $1,200, but it was bittersweet. Believe me, it was bittersweet. So anyway, that's my memory from long ago, senior moments. I really appreciate you tuning in. If you will, take a look at this little video and hit the like button. It would make us feel great. And I look forward to seeing you next Sunday at 5 o'clock on Senior Moments. Take care. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.